Hey everybody, today we're going to do a video about how to make a patchwork pad topper for sewing cloth pads. I had a couple of people ask me how to do this, and then one person specifically asked that I please make a video about how to do this. And I do patchwork pads 3 different ways, and this one is the easiest and the first way that I ever tried. It's just a checkerboard patchwork block, and I'm going to show you with scraps of fabric, and that's the beauty of this. You can do this with little tiny irregular pieces of scrap fabric you have that you don't want to throw away, and that's what I'm doing in this video. Or you can, if you have a couple of pieces of fabric that you think would look really beautiful together and you want to use them together, you can completely cut out your pieces and plan those out that way as well. So it kind of works both of those ways. Keep in mind that I am not a professional quilter. I'm not a very experienced quilter. I have been using a machine to sew for less than a year. So keep that in mind, and if what you really want is a video about how to properly do a patchwork quilt with blocks, there are hundreds of videos on the internet and YouTube even that are made by people who are just wonderful and really know what they're doing. But specifically for the pad topper application, I don't think that I've seen one. So I'm happy to do this. I'm happy to show it to you. It's one of my favorite things to do now. And it will help you get better at piecing quilt toppers to do it this way. So let's go ahead and get into it and see what I've got. Okay, so you'll want to assemble some things. You're going to need scrap fabric, something to measure with. I used a rotary cutter. You can also use scissors. A marker, a washable marker is helpful here, but the most important thing is you're going to need a template or a measurement. Okay, so here I'm going to demonstrate the first way to do this, which is the fastest way. It's with a rotary cutter. You take your little template. Here I'm using a 2.5 inch square, which will result in a 2 inch finished square because we're going to use a 1/4 inch seam allowance. So a 2.5 inch square, and I'm just going to cut out a little piece here with my rotary cutter on my cutting mat. If you've never used a rotary cutter, please don't try to do this on a piece of furniture. It'll tear up your wood. Okay, and so there's a square, and you can just cut them all out this way, or you can use scissors. Now I'm demonstrating cutting it out with scissors. I've sped this video up because I tried to do this with thread snips, which was so stupid. I don't know why I did that. But anyway, if you're doing this, you're just going to, on the wrong side of the fabric, trace around your template. If it's a pattern where it's just a repeating pattern and you don't need to be so careful, you can fold up the fabric and cut out more than one at a time. With a regular pair of scissors, this is really easy to do. I just ended up using these little thread snips, and it was difficult, so I sped it up a little bit. And so this is the other way you come out with your squares. And basically what you need to do is just keep cutting squares until you have a large enough selection of them to accommodate your pad template, your pad cover template. Alright, so here I am, and I am sorting out these rows. Now I can't tell you how many squares you're going to need to cut because patterns are all different shapes and sizes. So basically you need to keep cutting out squares until when you put your pad topper template in the middle for your pattern in the middle, there's plenty to cover it. And keep in mind that this is going to decrease by a 1/2 inch depending on how many for each row that you have there, both in length and width. Because we're going to use a 1/4 inch seam allowance on all of these, so they will be smaller when you sew them together, so you're going to need more than you think. Now basically the idea with this is you want to sort your little squares and assemble them in a way that you find visually pleasing. In addition to which, though, you need to keep in mind that the stuff that's out on the edges, and I forgot to do this when I was assembling this, so you'll see in the finished product I've moved some squares around from where I demonstrated here. But you need to make sure that the stuff on the edges, because that's all going to be on the edges of the pad, and some of it will be completely cut off and you won't even be using it in your pattern. So the squares that you want to highlight, the prints that you want to highlight, make sure those are more in the middle. But you just keep arranging them until you like the arrangement that you've got in a grid like this. You don't need a fancy cutting mat. You can do this on any flat surface. And basically what I'm doing here is I'm just trying to make sure that the colors are distributed evenly. And I can't believe it's been so long since I made a patchwork pad topper that I completely forgot, like, my little too cute Scotty dog down there in the bottom left corner. I'm going to end up moving him into the middle later because I want him to be in the pad where you can see him. And down there on that corner, you can almost guarantee he won't even be in there, much less featured. Okay, so this is what you do. You lay your pattern down, and when you think you've got enough to get started, then we can start assembling the squares. Okay, so what we're going to do here is a process called chain stitching, where we don't just cut the thread between each one. So you're going to line these blocks up in whichever way helps you to remember which order you're going to sew them in so that you keep your rows consistent. So I put row 2 on top of row 1, I put row 4 on top of row 3, and I would keep going that way down to the bottom. So we're going to take these first 4 rows and sew them up. Okay, here's how you chain stitch. I'm going to show you in regular time how I do the first 3. Now you can pin these if you like. I was trying to show that, but I don't find it necessary to pin together pieces of fabric this small. I'm able to control them pretty well. So what you do is you just put it in down until it catches the feed dogs. You should start with your needle in the down position. I didn't do that. Again, rookie mistake, but it turned out okay. But you want to put your needle in the down position before you start. And then when you get to the end of each little pair of squares, just do a couple of extra stitches off the end. So right off the end, do an extra couple stitches, and then line up your next pair. Make sure that you've got those edges nice and even, and you can do that with your fingers or you can pin. And then sew the next one. Do the same thing, so right off the end, do an extra 2 or 3 stitches off the end, and then do your next one. And I'm going to do all, whatever it was, 8 or 10 pairs of squares this way. Watch this, I finally learned how to speed up my video. Check this next part out. Ta-da! I'm moving so much faster. Basically, this is just going to show you how you go through and you sew them all together. And then in the end, when you get these finished, you'll see that they're all attached together with little bits of string in between, and you just trim those. You just clip them apart at the end. Okay, so now when you get them all done, you're going to pull them off your machine, and you'll see they're attached together kind of like a pennant set of flags. And you just take your little thread snips and snip them apart. And then you lay them all out. I've just ironed these open after I sewed the 2 rows together. And so how you're going to continue with this is you put row 2 over on top of row 1, just like we did before, only this time when you sew them together you'll have 4 in a row. And so you're going to chain stitch these. I'm not going to show you this in video, but I'll show you here. You just go across these little connections there, and then when you're finished, you do it exactly the same way as we did before. And when you're finished, you'll come out and you'll have these little rows with 4 attached together. And then finally you repeat the process. It goes a lot quicker than it does to explain. Then you put row 5 on, you sew across the same way, and then you'll get these little rows of 5. And then you flip row 1 over onto row 2, and then you come and do row 3 back on row 2, and then you attach the last row so that they're all together. And this is what you end up with. And remember at the beginning I told you, I said when it looks like you have enough, go and sew them together. Now this is what happens sometimes. Once you get them sewn together, you realize that you need to add another row. So that's what we're going to do here. Okay, so what I've done is I've just added another row of 4 squares. I made them exactly the same way. And now we test it and it's big enough so we can use this for our pad topper. I want to take a minute to talk to you about seams, because in quilting seams are very important, and how you treat them and how you press them is very important. And so when I first started making these, I was very careful to open all of my seams, and when I sewed my rows together I would nest the seams properly. But as I went on, I realized we're not quilting this, and as a pad topper, it just doesn't matter. You can't feel a difference. Sewing it is not any easier or more difficult depending on the bulk of the seams. So you can be as fastidious or as lazy as you'd like about how you deal with your seams on these. I'm very lazy with mine, and I find it doesn't make much of a difference. I'm just careful when I'm sewing them together to make my seams match up. Now for placement, another good reason to make these bigger than you actually need them to be is so that you have options for placement. You can make it go diagonally to get sort of a diamond effect if you'd like, or you can just have them straight and make it bigger so that you can move the pad around and make sure that the squares that you find most visually pleasing or important are showcased on your pad topper. And now it's time to just get a marker. That's what I'm looking for up there. And we're just going to trace around the pad. Okay, so now you get to watch me draw a line around the pad. And basically you just want to get as close to the edge of the pattern as possible so that when you're done, it's easy to cut out. Make sure that all your lines are dark enough to be visible. I find that these Crayola washable markers are absolutely perfect for the job, and I use them for almost everything. Okay, so there you have it. And then the next step, of course, is to get a really good strong pair of fabric scissors, because you're going to have to cut through these seams that you've made, which is a little bit more difficult and tricky and persnickety than regular fabric without seams in it. So there you go, and I'm going to spare you this time. I'm not going to make you watch me cut out the entire shape. So here in a minute, the video is going to cut out, and when you come back, it will magically be cut. There it is. There's our finished pad topper, and then you sew this exactly the way you would sew any other pad topper together. Treat it just like any other pad topper. And I put it together into a pad for you, and I think it's lovely. So anyway, I hope you enjoyed that. I hope it was helpful, and I will see you again soon. Thanks for watching.